Welcome back to another episode of Human Monsters, where we will shatter any illusions that you ever had that the human race deserves to be at the top of the food chain. Once again, my team and I want to thank you all for the amazing support you continue to show despite our very human errors we make every now and again. We truly appreciate our die-hard followers, and we are blown away by the amount of love you have shown us on our social media pages. We really are grateful for every star, every like, every review, and every positive comment you leave. And believe me, when I tell you, we do take notes of your criticisms. The show, after all, is for you, and any advice we get to make it better, we take in a positive light. Now let's get down and dirty with some of the most despicable humans in cases so shocking I even had to take several long breaks while writing. So, buckle up, buttercups, because this ride is going to make you angry, sad, and like me, you will wonder how the hell did this happen. I am a hermit, and if I never leave my home, it would be fine with me. I do like to visit a nearby park every now and again to get some sunshine and fresh air. My favorite bench is near a sand pit where I watch the little kids play. Sometimes I step in and help a child when a 2 or 3-year-old sometimes struggles with the swings or the equipment without assistance. No, I'm not a pervert, but I do like to observe the way these children play. There is something so delicate about their innocence and so alarming about their vulnerability that I often find myself overprotective and wishing with all my heart that they never lose their imaginations and forever live in a carefree world. When I decided to write about the neglect of a parent, I was shocked and surprised about the number of cases I found and how difficult it was to choose those that would be the best suited for this episode. One after another, the stories of the little butterflies who just happened to have at least one abusive parent left me speechless, and those who know me know that is not an easy thing to achieve. Especially under the age of 3 years old, a child is so vulnerable, needful, and fragile. One of the things that struck me as I did research about these senseless and very preventable murders was that when the body of an adult is found, people always think they found a mannequin, and it's never a mannequin. With children, they generally think it's a doll, but the cases we are about to cover are so vulgar that trick the mind plays on the person that finds the body only lasts for a moment. This is the episode that will convince you that human monsters do walk amongst us. Even if you yourself do not have children, I am sure you have nieces, nephews, friends, and co-workers who have babies and little children. They are everywhere, and then there is also the undeniable fact that each and every one of us, once upon a time, was a newborn baby. Babies hardly have bones. They have soft cartilages with an unprotected spot on the top of their heads that close with time. They can't feed themselves, lift their heads for at least the first couple of weeks, and the only way they know how to show they are in need is to cry. Being a parent or caregiver is one of the hardest jobs under the sun. To wake up every day to 4 hours to feed, change, and comfort a child is draining, to say the least. If you do everything right, you are still just trying to keep this little human alive for the first month or two. But that first smile, that first recognition in their eyes, and the way 4 tiny fingers curl around your big index finger should, and does for most, evoke a sense of pride, responsibility, and a primal urge to protect and take care of this little person. That is the way it is supposed to be, but today I'm going to tell you in the first part of the series about people who should never have had children, nor should those children have been left in their care, because there was no care. From the day they were born, there was neglect, pain, torture, and the kind of damage that a child carries with them for the rest of their lives. Now, let's get into the first of these heartbreaking stories. Precious Doe, Erica Green. She was a 3-year-old little girl who loved the Teletubbies and had a smile for everyone, but when her little broken body was discovered, she had no name. Usually, they call an unidentified victim John or Jane Doe. But for someone so young, the name seemed inappropriate. That is why she was given the name Precious Doe until her real name was identified. On the 28th of April 2001, just after 6 p.m. on a Saturday evening, 2 patrol officers from the Kansas City Police Department were searching a wooded area for an elderly man with dementia that had been reported as missing. As they made their way through the busy part of the east side of the city, they did not find the old man, who was later located and returned safely to his home. Instead, right off the pathway, they stumbled across the naked body of a little black girl who could not be older than 3 or 4 years old. The disturbing part was not only the maggots that had started to infest the little body, but that her head was missing. Detectives who were called to the scene were also shocked at the brutality of removing a toddler's head and to discard the body like garbage. This was clearly the work of someone who needed to be caught as quickly as possible. Sergeant Bernard, who spoke on the Discovery Channel, said this was the case he would never forget. Despite using luminol, there was no sign of her head or clothing, and it became apparent that the little girl was murdered somewhere else. Detectives were convinced that, because of her age, someone must have reported her missing, but despite combing through reports, it appeared that no one had reported a child of this age and description as missing and without a head. Identifying her would be even more challenging. Law enforcement can't find any report about a missing child, and as the information starts to reach the community of Kansas City, its citizens are not only moved by the fact that no one has claimed her, they decided to adopt her as their own and gave her the name Precious Doe. The severity of the crime caught the attention of the FBI early, and volunteers started to search the surrounding area where the tiny little body was found. On the 1st of May, only 3 days after her body was found, a dedicated volunteer came across a black plastic trash bag, which seemed odd, and as he poked at it with a stick, human remains were clearly visible. Finally, amongst other discarded pieces of rubbish and only a few feet away from her body, Precious Doe's head had finally been found. Since her head was found, an extensive autopsy could be conducted. A computer-generated sketch was released in the hopes of identifying her, but the child appeared older than her actual age. The sketch did produce 600 tips, but no leads were viable. Local schools and foster homes were contacted, but no luck was being had. 4 months after the discovery of her little body, Precious Doe's case was featured on America's Most Wanted, and a sculptured bust of what she might look like was released. By using clay, her actual skull was made more lifelike. Despite the incredible work the forensic team did, still no leads led to any identification of the little girl. Despite her identity not being known, the case caught the attention and the hearts of many across the country, especially a man by the name of Alonzo Washington. Alonzo became an activist and made sure no one forgot that a toddler was maimed and discarded in their own backyard of Kansas City. He had stickers, t-shirts, and flyers printed at his own expense and distributed the likeness of the little girl across the city. He led many of the searches early on and would ensure the media did not forget about the 3-year-old without a name. Alonzo was painfully aware that the fact that she was a black child, that the focus was on her murder, should be amplified by the community. On the 8th of December 2001, a funeral was held for Precious Doe with almost 1,000 people in attendance. The public, including Sergeant Bernard, were still relentless in the pursuit of not only her name, but the name of the person who took her life in such a vicious manner. The attention not only helped gather tips in the case of Precious Doe, but also other little black girls that seemed to just vanish in the foster system. Across the country, from different states, missing 3-year-old black girls were compared, but none were a match to the little nameless victim. After almost a year, the team on the case started to feel that they might never close the case. The DNA of 10 different girls was tested against that of Precious Doe, but none were a match. In May 2003, another artist decided to have a go at recreating the facial features of the baby girl. Photos from the actual crime scene as well as the morgue were used to produce a frontal and side profile of the victim. The FBI then decided on the 15th of June to exhume the body of the baby girl and have a forensic anthropologist recreate the original features to the best of their abilities. Using 3D rendering and clay, all hope was placed on this final recreation because no one felt the previous images were exact enough to have her identified. Everyone felt the final bust was the most accurate, and by the 19th of September of the same year, the image was released and finally a huge break came in the case. Alonzo Washington never gave up and continued his crusade with each new recreation and even amped it up by taking out a few small ads in newspapers. According to his interview in the documentary Deadly Moms and Dads, he finally received a call in April 2005. The man on the other end of the line only identified himself as Thurman McIntosh, who had a thick southern accent, was calling all the way from Oklahoma. His son's wife, Michelle, was staying with him while his son was in prison, and during conversations he overheard. He became suspicious of what Harold referred to as the deed. He had confronted his son during a call, and Harold had told him information that only the killer would know. He told Alonzo that he believed Precious Doe was his granddaughter, and that he believed her father had killed her. His son, whose name was Harold Johnston, was married to Michelle Johnston, who was the mother of the little girl whose name was Erica Michelle Marie Green. The tip seemed viable, and when he asked Thurman why he did not take the tip to the police, Thurman told him that he had made almost 50 calls to the police on several occasions over the past 5 years, but was never taken seriously. Alonzo requested a photo of his granddaughter as well as a strand of hair from his daughter-in-law. A few days went by, and Alonzo received not only the photo, but also hair from Michelle to compare to the DNA of Precious Doe. The moment the match was made, Sergeant Bernard rushed to Oklahoma to speak to Thurman in person. On the 15th of May, 1997, Erica was born to Michelle, who had been in prison for the last 4 weeks of her pregnancy with Erica for larceny. Erica's stepfather was also in prison for a parole violation, larceny, and assault charges. Within 24 hours, a friend of Michelle's grandmother, Betty Brown, would take custody of the little baby girl by providing just a driver's license and another piece of identification. A one-page form was signed, and the woman, who was already in her 70s, became the guardian of little Erica Green. There were no follow-up visits from the authorities, but under her care, Erica thrived, even being able to spell her own name at the age of 3 years old. Michelle was no stranger to the Department of Child Services and was even warned about her drug use while being pregnant with Erica. She had already lost custody of 4 of her children before she was pregnant with Erica because of neglect and substance abuse in Illinois and Oklahoma. 2 of those children tested positive for cocaine when they were born. She stated in an article by the Oklahoma newspaper that Erica was a clever and curious little girl, and the match between the two was surprisingly positive. She called Erica a joy to have around, but after her release from prison, Michelle would drift in and out of their lives for very brief periods of time to visit Erica. On the 4th of April 2001, Michelle had reached out to Betty and asked to take Erica out to a family reunion. Betty, who felt she had no real rights to the child, agreed, and that would be the last time she would see Erica ever again. Detectives wanted to speak to both Michelle and Harold after she was identified, and fortunately, they were not difficult to find as both were serving time in prison on unrelated charges. Michelle quickly identified the photo they showed her of her daughter and wrote on the back, "Mama is so sorry. You are always in my heart and soul. Love you always, little E." The tale Michelle told about the demise of her little daughter was harrowing. According to her, she was not at home when the incident happened, and that Erica was still alive when she got home to take a bath. She said she told Erica to lie down, but Harold decided to kick her in the head. She claimed that around or on 28th of April 2001, her husband was aggravated that Erica was not going to bed. She was tearful and defiantly homesick and missing Betty, who was the only person she ever knew as caregiver. Harold was under the influence of PCP and alcohol, and he kicked her in the head and left her unconscious on the floor for 2 days. It would later be revealed that had she received immediate medical care, her life could have been saved. But after 48 hours, she was dead. Lying on the cold floor with no assistance, Michelle claimed to make a weak attempt at reviving her by putting her in a bath, but that her eyes had rolled back in her head, and Michelle knew she needed urgent medical care. But Harold refused. Michelle admitted that she knew Erica was going to die. Instead of taking her to a hospital, the couple decided to get rid of her body. They waited until dark and climbed through a window to discard of Erica's body. Harold used hedge clippers to cut off Erica's head and initially dumped it in a garbage can at a church. But as his paranoia took over, he retrieved the head and dumped it in the field not far from her body. After her confession, she requested to speak to her husband. She told him she came clean and that he should do the same. When he was given a photo of Erica, he wrote, "I am so sorry this happened to you. I will always love you with all my heart and soul." He then signed his name. Michelle not only distributed flyers, but cried at the vigil that was held in Erica's honor. Erica's autopsy revealed more than just a kick to the head. There were several blunt force trauma injuries to her little body. There was also no family reunion. The couple with Erica and an 8-month-old baby had moved into an apartment with one of Harold's family members. The family member later testified that she could see the little girl was homesick, which aggravated Harold. The cousin would say that he often beat Erica for crying, not eating, or if she wet herself. The cousin said she had, one night, heard a loud noise, and after that she never saw Erica again. She was told the child was sick, and despite knowing it was her daughter that needed to be identified, Michelle had been passing out flyers when Erica's identity was still unknown. By the time the trial took place in 2007, Michelle had had 8 children who all have been taken into care by the Department of Health Services. In the end, both parents were charged with the murder of Erica Green. Michelle, at the age of 33 years old, reached a plea agreement for murder, abandoning a child, neglect of a child, and tampering with physical evidence. She received a sentence of 25 years in prison. Harold decided to shoot his shot and went to trial, and Michelle would be one of the main witnesses at his trial, detailing the abuse her daughter had suffered. During the trial, it was revealed that Michelle suffered from substance abuse, physical abuse, prostitution, as well as untreated mental disorders. While on the stand, she admitted the main reason they did not seek medical help for Erica was because they both had outstanding warrants and they did not want to go back to prison. She apologized for not being a better mother. Harold was found guilty of murder, endangering the welfare of a child, and abuse of a child resulting in death. He showed very little remorse or regret for what he had done, and he even tried to get Michelle to change her testimony. He stated the obvious that Michelle was also abusive and neglectful, but this did not aid in his defense. Because his claims that he was under the influence when he killed her could not be proven, he was sentenced to life without parole. Larry Green, who was Erica's biological father, sued all the entities that had failed his daughter, and the lawsuit was settled for an unspecified amount. Betty Brown thanked everyone who helped in finding Erica and bringing her killers to justice. It's just a sad fact that it took 4 years for the little girl to get justice, and if Alonzo Washington was not so tenacious, she might never have received her name or her due. A memorial was erected not far from where she was found in her memory. Kamari Holland. When Christy Sipper arrived at the father of her daughter, Kamari's home, to pick her up, the little girl was over the moon. Kamari loved her mother unconditionally, but Christy had a monkey on her back, and her lust for drugs would steer an ordinary visit into a nightmare. What was supposed to be a sleepover turned into the last time of her short life, and all for a fix. On the 13th of December 2021, Christy called the Columbus, Georgia authorities to report that her daughter was missing. She claimed that when she woke up that morning at 3 a.m., her 5-year-old daughter was still fast asleep and next to her. But when she woke up again at 6 a.m., she had vanished into thin air. When she started her search for her daughter, she discovered the front door was open. The police took the report very seriously, and the report for the missing child was immediately broadcast widely. A tip quickly led them to the Bamboo Hotel, where a man by the name of Jeremy Williams had been staying in Phoenix, Alabama. Jeremy and his uncle, who had only arrived minutes before, were arrested without incident. Jeremy was a regular at the hotel where he might or might not have sold drugs to sustain his own habit. Jeremy was out on bond when he was arrested. Kamari's body was found only hours later, and Jeremy was directly implicated. But how did the little girl, who loved princesses, end up in the clutches of a 36-year-old monster? Kamari Holland had two older brothers from a different dad and a baby brother from Corey. She had just begun kindergarten at a school called Just for Kids to prepare her for grade 1. Her teacher and grandmother describe a lively little prankster who made her brothers the butt of the joke most of the time. She was infatuated with princesses, and she and her baby brother lived with her father, who had custody of the two children. Christy was only allowed to see the children on scheduled visits on the weekends and under Child Protection Services supervision. Her files are not for public disclosure, but it's confirmed that she had endangered a child with a chemical. She was charged with endangerment of a child because her baby was born in 2018 and blood tests revealed the baby had narcotics in his system. The courts had such a backlog that at the time of her daughter's disappearance, she had not yet appeared in court on these charges. But it was made very clear to her that she was not to be alone with the children under any circumstances. Kamari Lynette Holland was born on the 23rd of November 2016 to her mother Christy Sybil and her father Corey Holland in Columbus, Georgia. When Christy came to Corey's door on the 12th of December, he did not even want to open the door. But Kamari saw her mother and jumped up in excitement and opened it for her. Corey said she seemed sober at the time, and so he allowed her to visit with Corey, Jar, and Kamari for a while. But suddenly Kamari ran up to him and exclaimed in an excited voice that she was going to spend the night with her mommy. Corey was reluctant, but told Christy that if she took Kamari, she had to take little Corey as well, which she was reluctant to do. She finally agreed to take both children, but it must be emphasized that none of this arrangement was legal or allowed. Corey wanted to give Christy the benefit of the doubt and believed neither of his children would be in danger. Christy was acting very strange after reporting her child missing. She arrived at a toy drive with Kamari's toys, claiming that her daughter was a giving child and that she would want underprivileged children to have her things. At this point, no one was even certain of what had happened to the little 5-year-old. She told a story about Kamari giving her shoes to a homeless child out of selflessness in a performance that deserved at least a nomination for a Golden Globe. Christy milked the attention the press and media was giving her. She was, after all, the mommy of the little 5-year-old girl that went missing just before Christmas. Despite a gag order on the case, Christy's name was being dragged through the mud, and she saw the presence of a news crew as an opportunity to make herself look more positive. In the interview, she repeated that she had nothing to do with Kamari's disappearance. She proclaimed her love for her only girl, saying that Kamari was her life and that her daughter was just the sweetest girl in the world. On the 28th of December, Christy was arrested according to an incitement by local U.S. Marshals. Her charges included human trafficking as well as 3 other charges. She had trafficked her 5-year-old girl to Jeremy for sexual purposes. According to Christy's cell phone data, she had an association with Jeremy, which was not romantic. Jeremy liked his female partners a lot younger than Christy. Christy had serious substance abuse problems, and it's suspected that Jeremy was her dealer. There were also rumors that he was her pimp, but these allegations were never substantiated. 2 months before the incident with Kamari, Jeremy was arrested for family violence, assault, and third-degree cruelty to a child. He pled not guilty, but the court case was still following due process. It occurred after he slapped his wife in front of his children, and in 2009, he was charged with aggravated abuse and cruelty to a child when he dunked a child into a boiling pot of water. The water was so hot that it burned the skin off the child's feet and legs. His defense was that the child had pulled the pot onto him and scalded himself in the act. Due to the lack of evidence, he was found not guilty. Another incident happened when his wife was transferred to Alaska through her work for the Air Force, and his 1-month-old daughter, Nadia Williams, died from blunt force trauma. Once again, he got away with the crime since there were no witnesses and no evidence that he caused her death. With his arrest for the murder of Kamari, the North Pole Police had reopened the case and was keeping a close eye on Jeremy. He had been charged with capital murder while kidnapping, capital murder in the course of rape, capital murder while committing sodomy, child pornography, and abuse of a corpse. He not only filmed his assault on Kamari, but he also continued the filming and assault after she was deceased. All these charges put him as the perfect candidate for the death penalty. Next, the police made their way to 15th Avenue in Phoenix, Alabama, which was Jeremy's last address, and found the house completely empty, apart from the bruised, battered, and cold body of Kamari in one of the rooms. She had been strangled with either a rope or her clothing, and because of the extreme cold, a time of death was going to be difficult to determine. Christie was also charged with all the charges Jeremy was charged, but hers included human trafficking and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Police also suspect that she was there while the crimes against her daughter were being committed. It's unclear what she was given as payment for her daughter, but my best bet is money or drugs. From the incitements, it's clear that she was completely aware and a willing participant in all the crimes committed against her daughter. The question is how we got from Christie reporting her daughter as missing to Jeremy's abandoned home. Christie pled not guilty, and Jeremy also pled not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. The prosecution was, however, ready to take the case to court, and in 2022, new charges regarding rape, sodomy, and the abuse of a child were brought against him, involving another child under the age of 6 years old. Another claim that came out was that a couple of days before Kamari went missing, an unknown woman was kicked out of her house and went to Jeremy's house for refuge. When she tried to leave, he pushed a deep freeze in front of the door and sexually assaulted her by raping and sodomizing her. While he was abusing her, he kept on calling Kamari's name. After the assault, he told her that he had taught a little girl called Kamari how to give a blowjob, and he was proud of his achievement. This was the night before he killed the innocent little girl. This just proved that the sexual assault on the little girl had begun long before she was finally murdered. The unknown woman escaped when she told Jeremy where to get drugs and then asked to stop at a gas station to use the toilet. He kept her phone and ID, but once in the toilet, she had a second phone on her and called for help. She also alerted the store clerk, and the moment Jeremy knew something was wrong, he got the hell out of there. The case was reported to the police, and its investigation was in its infancy when the murder of Kamari happened. Kamari's father is in the process of trying to pass a law that the insanity defense cannot be used in the assault or murder of a child. Corey has also started a non-profit organization in honor of his daughter, and he is doing everything to keep his daughter's name alive. Jeremy Williams was sentenced by the Russell County Circuit Judge David Johnson for his crimes, with 4 death sentences for the rape, abuse, sodomy, and other crimes against Kamari Holland. It could be several decades before he is executed. Christie eventually took a plea bargain. She was given up to 20 years in prison, had to pay a $10,000 fine, and she had to testify against Jeremy Williams. She also must register as a sex offender for life. Sioban Rush. For one last example of what terrible parents can do to shatter the potential of 2-year-old little girls, we are going to travel to the country of South Africa. Despite the crimes against her happening thousands of miles from our previous cases, the story of how her innocent and pure little life ended is not much different than that of Kamari or Erica. In this part of the episode, there are, once again, the evils of substance abuse, physical abuse, and system failures that could have saved a little girl from an early grave. At the age of 2 years old, despite beginning to test boundaries and being fearlessly curious, a toddler is still very much still a baby and should be cared for 24 hours a day. No human being should experience the trauma and tragedy this little girl experienced, especially so young. Sioban Rush was brought into this world in 2019. I am not sure of her exact date of birth because her mother, Rochelle Botha, never registered her daughter. Rochelle grew up in the city of Johannesburg and went to school in Primrose, which is not a bad area at all. During her school years, she had an on and off relationship with a man by the name of Bradley Rush. She was very young when she fell pregnant with Bradley's children in 2017, again in 2018, and finally in 2019. In the end, only one would be registered with the Department of Home Affairs, as prescribed by the law. The eldest child would go to live with a relative when she was 1.5 years old, because Rochelle was pregnant again. She left Bradley during the pregnancy for another man. During this time, she was not really bothered with either of her children, and both would end up on a permanent basis with the relative. The fling with the new guy did not last long, and soon she was back in Bradley's arms. Clearly, Rochelle and her lover had not heard of the pill, condoms, and all the other means to prevent pregnancy, because shortly after their reunion, Rochelle was pregnant again. In a completely confusing move, Rochelle and her mother had managed to get the other 2 children back from the relative, despite her total lack of bonding or care. The couple and the 2 children went to live with a relative in Germiston, and they managed to block the adoption procedure the previous relative had begun. It's believed that Sioban was born on the 28th of October 2019, despite the fact that Rochelle was already not coping with the other 2 children. Vonnie, as she was known, loved music and dancing, and was, according to friends and relatives, a loving child. Neither Rochelle nor Bradley were working at this time, and it was decided that the eldest would return to the original relative who was taking care of her. Bradley did odd jobs now and again, but he was arrested in April 2021 and would spend a year in prison. It's unclear what the charges were. While Bradley was in prison, Rochelle and her younger children were living with relatives. Rochelle would, 2 months into Bradley's prison sentence, meet and start to date a man by the name of Cornelius Stefan von Niejerk, and where Rochelle was not even 21 years old, he was in his 30s. Stefan, as he was known, was from Valkersville, and within weeks the two started to live together, and this is where the wheels on the bus really started to come off. The couple, with the children, decided to move into a cargo container without power or running water. First, Siobhan's brother was fetched to live with them. They then decided to fetch Sioban and the eldest child to join the family. She was allowed at this point to see them every weekend, but she only wanted to see them every second weekend, which does not make sense that she wanted her children with her on a permanent basis. She began to complain that all 3 children with her at once was too much to handle, and it is most likely because she and Stefan were deep in the grip of addiction. Despite the havoc and obvious problems, The couple got engaged 3 months after Bradley went to prison. The lack of logic and common sense is above comprehension. From the moment Stefan entered the children's lives, bruises started to appear as well as strange behavior from the young children. Witnesses would later state that Sioban would, in the middle of the freezing winter, visit them in a t-shirt and a pair of shorts without a diaper or any underwear. The witness also noticed a burn mark on Sioban's lip. Sioban also complained that her private parts were burning and were hurting. Rochelle's excuse was that the child had just fallen. The witness asked to take the little girl from home because she was in a terrible state, and Rochelle immediately agreed without knowing the woman. It's mind-blowing that a woman would just give her 2-year-old to someone that they hardly knew, but in South Africa, I doubt anyone would care that much. At the time, Stefan's brother had gone missing, and the couple were more worried about finding him than about the welfare of their children. The brother would eventually be found unharmed. Sioban, upset by the disruption, cried, refused to bathe, but would eventually settle down, be cleaned, and given a bottle of milk before she fell asleep in the woman's arms. The next morning, the woman gave her some yogurt to eat and allowed her to watch television with her own toddler. She took extensive photographs of the numerous injuries she saw on Sioban and contacted Childline to report the abuse. Nothing could come of this report. Sioban spent 3 days with this woman, but would inevitably be returned to Rochelle and her partner. It was in February of 2022 that Rochelle would first be on the radar of the Germiston police. The complaint was from an anonymous source that said Rochelle was tied up and held up against her will. Rochelle denied the claims and said that her family was making up stories to instigate discord between her and Stefan. She even called the policing forum to arrange for a visit days before Sioban was murdered. At the visit, she claimed she would kill him before he killed her, and that he was a good man. Rochelle had no injuries, and the children happened to not be at the home at the time of the visit. From that moment on, the 2 younger children, Rochelle and Stefan, vanished off the face of the earth and were impossible to contact. The relative who was looking after Rochelle's oldest daughter was deeply concerned, and for weeks before the murder, she would contact the police to do welfare checks, which seemed to not happen. The next day, the relative would hear from Sioban's mother was on the morning of her death when she messaged her and said, "Oh, don't stress, it's fine." This was in response to a message that Rochelle wanted to know something from her relative. The relative tried to get hold of her for hours, but that was the only response she got in the early hours of the morning. Rochelle would tell different versions about what had happened to cause the death of Sioban. That Sioban was killed by Stefan while Rochelle was tied up and could do nothing. On another occasion, Rochelle said that Sioban had slipped on a sponge in the bath and died. In another, she said that Stefan strangled her to death. On the 11th of May 2022, the lifeless body was dropped off at the Coopersville Clinic in Germiston. The man who had dropped her off had fled immediately after. Her little body was covered in bruises. The Primrose Police Department was notified, and they found the little girl with blood in her mouth and blue marks everywhere in different stages of healing. She also had a wound at the back of her head, and her autopsy confirmed that she suffered injuries from head to toe. In total, 49 different injuries were noted. Most of the injuries happened within a couple of hours or days of her death. The likely cause of death was blunt force trauma. Because she was never registered at birth, it took a month to issue her death certificate. Her funeral was on the 2nd of June, 2022. Rochelle and Bradley carried the small coffin as her favorite song, Dance Monkey, played. Finally, her life was celebrated by releasing pink balloons after her burial. Stefan was quickly apprehended in Bedford View. Sadly, it was Siobhan's murder and not her abuse that put a flame under their backsides. It would be the day after Siobhan's murder that Rochelle would admit that Stefan abused her children. During his first court appearance, he sobbed with his head in his hands. He abandoned his bail application. Rochelle had to go to court with a bulletproof vest out of fear of angry protesters. She had to leave the court proceedings because of safety reasons. A week later, Rochelle would be arrested and charged with murder. Rochelle was aware of the neglect and abuse of her children, and that burn mark on her daughter's lip was from a crack pipe. Bradley claimed that his daughter had died while he had tried to get her back. When Rochelle appeared in court for her bail application, the judge was not impressed because she arrived in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. Both faced charges of assault, rape, sexual assault, and a charge of human trafficking. Rochelle, while in custody, once again quickly found comfort in the arms of another man. The trial would begin in 2023, and Rochelle's grandfather, who had always been there to support his great-granddaughter, passed away. The truth about what happened is that home, on the day Siobhan died, was stark. Rochelle, Stefan, and two other witnesses were doing drugs. The one witness was convinced the burn on Siobhan's lip was from a crystal meth pipe. Siobhan was also in pain, and her brother had several black and blue marks on his body. Siobhan had approached the two witnesses and asked them for something to eat and drink, as the four adults were smoking crystal meth. Stefan had apparently taken Siobhan for a bath in the early hours of the morning, and she screamed blue murder to the point the witnesses wanted to intervene. Rochelle did not care at all about the welfare of her children. Stefan then suddenly ran out of the bathroom and tried to resuscitate Siobhan. Rochelle still showed no interest. One of the guests told Stefan to take the child to the hospital. He put her in the car, but Rochelle refused to go along. Rochelle also showed no emotion when she was told her child was dead. Rochelle claimed Stefan was grumpy since he had lost his job and had a short temper. Then there was the slipping on a sponge story, and at last Stefan strangling her daughter. The court sentenced Rochelle to 25 years in prison, and Stefan was sentenced to 2 life terms. During the proceedings, it was also revealed that the children were used as collateral and given to dealers for sexual abuse in lieu of payment. Is there any hope for the next generation in a country where 3 children are murdered every day and with so many authorities that are supposed to assist in the safety of a child? This is a PSA by Sober Living America.
I knew that my addiction was a problem when I was choosing drugs over my child, and when I couldn't take care of my little girl without being high.
Mommy said Daddy had to go away because he didn't stop doing drugs. Mommy used to do a lot of fun stuff, but we don't really do any fun stuff anymore. Mommy rather stay home and drink, but she doesn't like to play with me and Sarah while she's drinking.
And my husband and I did a lot of meth together. We have 2 small children. I have a 7-year-old little boy and a 5-year-old little girl. I was physically there, but I was never there for them emotionally. And in the end of my addiction, I was not involved in their lives.
Addiction took my daddy away and made us so we can't be a family anymore. Mommy and me with Daddy would get better.
I have a little girl that is 3. She's almost 4. Her name is Reese. I definitely put drugs in front of her. She lived in a household that was full of just constant chaos and drug use. Our drug use would cause, our fights to get violent. Reese witnessed one of those fights. She was asking her dad why he was hurting her mommy, and she was just begging him to stop.
I wish Mommy didn't drink, and I miss the way it used to be. Sarah and I want our mommy back.
And one day my son said, I don't have a mommy or a daddy. And it was then that I realized I had to do something different.
When I came to Sober Living America, all of that changed, and it changed really pretty quickly. I'm looking so forward to my future with my daughter. I do plan on getting her back and being able to raise her. I do get to see her on a regular basis, and that's just amazing.
Since I've been here, I have went home every weekend to be with my kids. It feels good to be able to be a positive influence in their life instead of such a negative influence. We're getting our family back, and that's the best feeling in the world.
20 million kids live in a house like mine. For $1 a day, you can help me get my mommy back.
This episode was written by Penny Morris. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.